The Canon R6 Mark II versus the Sony A7 IV. Which one should you go with? Which one should you buy? Which one is better? That's what we're going to talk about in today's video. Now, why am I comparing Canon versus Sony? They're two completely different ecosystems, two completely different cameras. Well, because I think it'll just be fun. That's really the only point. I'm thinking about switching from Canon to Sony. This is my dog. This is my little homie. But I got the A7 IV because I'm thinking about switching to Sony. If you haven't watched that video yet, you can click right up here after this video and you'll see why I'm considering switching from Canon to Sony. So let's talk about these two cameras. First, we're going to talk about the Canon R6 Mark II. So the Canon R6 Mark II is a 24 megapixel sensor camera. It is also full frame. It has two SD card slots. It is a 6K downsample for video to 4K, and it records up to 60 frames per second without crop. Now that's important. We're gonna come back to that later. And 10-bit. It records in C-Log 3, 12 frames per second in mechanical shutter, and for silent electronic shutter can get up to 40 frames per second. It has a fully articulating screen, micro HDMI port, and over 1,000 autofocus points. Now, some of the things that I really like about this Canon R6 Mark II is just the build quality and the ergonomics of this camera. I feel like this camera fits really well in my hand. It's almost like it's tailored to my hand. Now, that is very subjective. Depending on who you are, it's going to fit differently. If you have bigger hands, if you have smaller hands, if you have weaker hands, if you have stronger hands, that's all going to be subjective. So the part about build quality and ergonomics is going to be pretty subjective to the buyer, but I just feel like it just sits really naturally in my hand. This camera is a hybrid camera, and I like the dial on the left-hand side that you can easily switch from photo to video. So when you're doing any type of hybrid situation, especially running gun, it's a really quality camera for that. One of the things that really makes it hybrid in my opinion is that when you switch between photo and video, it remembers the settings that you had in that said mode. So if you were in 50 frames per second for video, so you can get cinematic 24 frames per second, then you switch over to photo, it's going to remember what settings you had the last time you took a picture. That's really going to help in any type of hybrid situation, and that's really important to me. Also, the dial on top lets you switch really easily between the different modes: manual, aperture priority, shutter priority, bulb mode, and then also your 3 custom modes. For the functionality and the customization of this camera, it does have a scroll wheel, so you can scroll really fast within the menu, and you also have a bunch of buttons on the back that you can customize. Now, when it comes to customization, I do think it's lacking just a little bit, but you'll see why I'm saying that when I switch over to the A7 IV. Another thing I love about this camera is that it just doesn't overheat. Put an asterisk over that. The only time I've ever had this camera flirt with overheating, and when I say flirt with overheating, meaning the overheating logo came up on the camera, was when I was recording an engagement shoot for video, and I was recording a lot of frames at 4K 60, and we were outside. So it didn't overheat, but it just gave me that warning, but I was already out shooting at 4K 60 for a couple hours. And on top of that, I was recording in C-Log 3. So I'm trying to pull the most information out of this camera, and I still got 2 hours before he even gave me the overheating signal. Of course, one thing I don't like about this camera is the micro HDMI. It's just really small, really cheap, really easy to break. And also the little doors that come on the side of this camera, they're just really flimsy and really just not the best ergonomically, I guess you would say. But, you know, it's not the end of the world. But we're gonna kind of touch on that and compare that when I talk about the A7 IV as well. So if you're looking to buy a Canon camera, if you're a hybrid shooter, or even if you're just a photo or a video shooter, this is definitely a camera I will highly recommend. The features and the specs and the text of this camera paired with a good RF mount lens is going to give you super high quality photos, super high quality video. I love this camera. I love Canon in general. And then you're probably asking, like, why am I buying the Sony? Why did I even flirt with switching to Sony if I love this camera so much? Like I said, go watch that video that I talked about earlier, which will give you some ideas and some insight as to why I'm thinking about switching to Canon. But with that being said, let's switch over to the A7 IV. We're not going to switch over to like recording. I'm already recording on it. I'm not going to switch. Anyway, I'm just going to talk about the A7 IV. The Sony A7 IV is priced at $2,100, technically $2,098, so just $100 more than the Canon R6 Mark II. So what is it sporting that it is a higher price than the Canon R6 Mark II? Are you just paying for the name, or are you paying for some additional features? Well, let's get into it. The Sony A7 IV is a 33 megapixel sensor camera. It has 2 SD card slots as well, but also inside that card slot, it also has a CF Express Type A card. So if you're shooting high burst rates of photo or high quality video, then you can put in a CF Express Type A card. Even though they're super expensive, they're super fast. So it just depends on what you're shooting. If you aren't doing any high quality stuff and you're just a wedding and portrait photographer like me, you'll be cool with some V90s and call it a day. The Sony A7IV is a 7K image downsampled into 4K, so you're getting a little bit more resolution on the video side, and it does go up to 4K 60. However, there is a 1.5 times crop at 4K 60, which isn't the end of the world if you aren't doing a whole lot of video. But if you're like a videographer or like a wedding videographer and you do a lot of slow motion, that is definitely something you're gonna wanna keep in the forefront in your mind, that there is a crop at 4K 60. The A7IV also shoots in log, while the Canon shoots in C-Log 3. The Sony A7IV shoots in S-Log 3 as well as S-Log 2. So you're getting a little bit more dynamic range with the Sony A7IV, and they also sport a nice little color profile called S-Cinetone, which is the profile I'm recording in right now. And it just gives, it's kind of like log, but it makes it easier to grade, and you just start off with a really natural, cleaner look than the flat image off of log. So if you're new to color grading, I do recommend S-Cinetone. So if you're not, so you don't have to pull as many colors out as that great image in log. The A7IV shoots up to 10 frames per second and also has the same fully articulating screen as the Canon R6 Mark II, but it does have full-size HDMI, unlike the Canon. So that is going to be a deal breaker for a lot of people. I don't like micro HDMI. I love the fact that the Sony has full-size HDMI, but is that going to be enough for someone to want to switch from Canon to Sony, or is that going to be enough for somebody to buy Sony instead of Canon? I think it just depends on what you do. If you're doing a lot of video, that full-size HDMI is going to come in clutch, because you're going to most likely be using a monitor, and it's going to be so much easier just to do a full-size HDMI to HDMI for your monitor rather than going full-size HDMI to micro HDMI. And then this camera has 759 autofocus points. So a little bit less points for the autofocus, but don't be discouraged or don't, be in a tizzy. The autofocus is still extremely fast. And I was reading, I got my little notepad for all this information that I'm giving y'all. But some things that I really like about the Sony A7IV, the build quality is a little bit better as far as durability. I feel like the Canon is a little bit more on the plastic side. The Sony is a little bit more on the metal side, and it just feels more durable, but the grip is a little bit more strange to me. Now, again, this is subjective. I feel like everybody's hands are going to be different. Everybody's going to have a different opinion on build quality and grip. So the Sony's grip is a little bit weird to me, but it's not to the point where it's like unusable. The A7IV is also a hybrid camera, but it is a little bit more awkward switching between photo and video with the little dial they have. And also, one thing about the A7IV is that when you switch between photo and video, it does not remember the settings you had it in said setting. So if you're recording at that cinematic 24 frames per second, so your shutter is 1/50, when you switch to photo, your shutter will still be 1/50. It does not remember. Now, if there's a setting or somebody out there knows how to switch that, and I'm just overlooking it or something, then let me know down in the comments. But as far as I know, it does not remember your settings from photo to video. The dial on top makes it a little less easier to switch between photo modes. So you have like your manual and your custom modes, but like I said, on the Canon, it has your aperture priority, shutter priority right there. So if you want to shoot in those modes, you're going to have to go into the menu and find those, which is a little, frustrating, but at the end of the day, I only shoot manual, so it's not the end of the world for me personally. When it comes to the ports, like I said, it has full-size HDMI, but the port doors are also a lot easier and they just look a lot better to open and close, and they feel a lot more durable than the Canon's ports. So again, this might not be the end of the world if you're not using ports often, but I mean, I'm not even using ports often except when I record YouTube videos when I have my HDMI. So, I mean, that's completely up to you. That's going to be subjective, and if it's important to you, then, that was going to be a decision that you're going to have to make regarding these two cameras. If it's not important to you, then it doesn't really matter. Now, when it comes to functionality and customization, that's where I think Sony really takes a leap ahead of Canon. So I feel like Sony has a lot more custom buttons that you can set and really make this camera your camera. Like whatever you want this camera to do, you can pretty much make it do that with all the customizable buttons that it has on its camera. And also, it also has a scroll wheel like the Canon does, but the The scroll wheel on the Sony also works as a D-pad as well. So you can set your top, your bottom, your left, and your right button on your D-pad as custom settings as well. The Canon is just a scroll wheel and only a scroll wheel. Now, when it comes to battery life on these cameras, when I looked at the batteries right out the box, I looked and I said, you know, the Canon's battery looks a whole lot bigger than the Sony battery. So the Canon's probably gonna get better battery life. But when I looked and compared and put these two side by side, I saw the Canon battery was longer, but the Sony battery was bigger. So then it made me think, okay, maybe you are getting the same battery life out of each camera. Now I think the battery life is going to be subjective as to what you shoot. If you're just shooting photos, then you're probably going to get great battery life out of both. But if you're recording, you know, S-Log3 all the time and 4K 60 all the time, then the battery life probably isn't going to be as great as some other cameras. Now, I've only had this camera for a little bit. I'm still testing it out, testing the waters, so I can't really do a deep dive on this A7 IV. But from what I've seen so far, the battery life is decent, but I've also heard the battery life is kind of trash. So that's for you to do a little bit more digging, a little bit more information, and I'm gonna do a little bit more digging and get a little bit more information about that as well, because I don't wanna be carrying around a bunch of batteries at all times because the battery life sucks. Speaking of batteries, I think this is really ghetto, but the Sony A7 IV in the box does not come with an external charger. So it comes with the proprietary battery, it comes with the block to plug into the wall, and it comes with the cord. But I called Sony earlier today and I was like, hey, I don't have an external charger. Am I supposed to have one? Like, do they leave it out? And they're like, oh no, you just plug your camera in and that's how it charges the battery, which I think is very strange. But alas, there's a way around it. So if you do want an external battery and that's something that you really need, you can buy this KNF external battery. And this is like 50 bucks on Amazon, and it actually comes with all 3 batteries. So for 50 bucks, you get 3 extra batteries, and then you also get an external charger, so you don't have to constantly plug your camera in to the wall to charge, because that's just weird to me. Canon's cameras, all of them, come with external chargers, which I think is really useful. Now in video mode for this camera, like I mentioned on the Canon, or when it came to 4K 60, it did overheat, or it didn't overheat, but it gave me the overheating warning after about 2 hours of shooting continuously at 4K 60. And on this camera, I'm not gonna lie, earlier today, I was trying to record videos and it was overheating in like 9 minutes, 10 minutes. And I was recording in, 4K 24, S-Cinetone, not even log. Like, it wasn't pulling, in my opinion, a lot of information from this camera, but it was still overheating. Like, it actually overheat and shut off earlier. So I watched some YouTube videos and I changed some settings, and now I'm at 19 minutes and 30 seconds right now, and I don't have any overheating warnings. So I guess those settings helped, but at the same time, I don't think that there should be all these hoops you gotta jump through in order to stop the camera from overheating. Like, all the videos I watched was like, you can open the screen, you can get an external fan, you can open the battery door, you can open the SD card door. And I was like, you shouldn't have to do all that for a camera not to overheat in 10 minutes. So the Canon never overheated. Like, I have great, results with the camera when it comes to video. But now that I changed some settings and, looked at some videos, I'm 20 minutes in and I have no overheating warning on the Sony A7 IV. So, which is ideal and which I really like. So maybe this doesn't have as bad as an overheating issue as I thought earlier. But like I said, it's kind of weird that you have to go into the settings in order to change all these things in order to get it to not overheat. Now, the big thing that I will repeat, like I talked about in the last video, the lens selection between these two cameras is going to be the make or break of you choosing a camera. So the Canon R6 Mark II and all the Canon full frame cameras, they do not make third-party lenses, or they don't allow third-party manufacturers to make lenses for their Canon RF mount autofocus. They do let third-party manufacturers make manual lenses for the RF mount, but not for autofocus. Sony allows third-party manufacturers to make lenses make autofocus lenses for their cameras. Like, I just picked this up. You've probably seen videos on this camera or on this lens, but I just picked up this Aurora 85mm 1.4 from Sure, and this is you know, 1.4, good glass, 15 aperture blades, and it's probably a stunning lens. I say probably because I haven't used it yet, because it just came in the mail like a couple hours ago. But I got this for $500, and a 85 1.2 for Canon is like almost $3,000. So that's gonna be kind of the turning point for a lot of people, the deciding factor when it comes to which camera you choose. So to bring this all together, which one is better, the Canon R6 Mark II or the Sony A7 IV? And my result is, it's up to you. It really is. It's up to you. Like, do you like Canon better? Do you like what it does better? Do you like Sony better? Do you like what it does better? Like, what about the camera sticks out to you? What are you using the camera for? Like, all this stuff is important for you to decide which camera to use. Am I still gonna switch to Sony? I don't know. Like, this next couple weeks, I'm gonna be testing this camera out heavy because I wanna know whether I wanna switch or not. Like, this overheating issue that I had earlier today had me ready to send this camera back, but now I'm 22 minutes in and I have not had an overheating warning. So if that's fixed, then that's a big selling point for me. But I think you need to go do your research and compile your own information about this camera to make your decision on which camera is going to work best for you. So with that being said, I hope this video was of some value to you. I hope that you got some useful information about the Canon R6 Mark II and also the Sony A7 IV. And if you like the image you're seeing, I'm recording on the Sony A7 IV and also the Sigma 35 1.4. If you're curious to see how this Canon looks video-wise, you can go look at literally any other one of my videos, because this is the first video I'm making where I recorded on a Sony camera, and you can kind of compare. So with that being said, I hope the video was of some value to you. Like and subscribe if it was. Leave a comment down in the comment description below, and leave me your thoughts about Canon versus Sony. So yeah, with that being said, appreciate y'all. Holla at y'all. Subscribe. Next time, peace. That made no sense, but I'm out.